Tonight's program, wildlife photographer. How many of you guys take wildlife photography? And I'm not talking about parties and stuff. Okay. Maybe half the folks here. All right. Joe and Mary Ann are with us. Joe and Mary Ann McDonald are professional wildlife photography husband and wife team who has been teaching photo workshops and leading photo tours for the past 36 years. Their images have appeared in every major natural history magazine and calendar throughout the years. Joe has written 8 how-to books on photography, 9 how-to ebooks, and is the author of numerous natural history books and is a columnist in 2 photography magazines. He has produced several photography teaching videos, and together they have created a YouTube channel to profile the work. Mary Ann has written 29 natural history children's books, has published a Hoot Hollow cookbook, and a coffee table book on the Amish. They have photographed the 7 big cats of the world 4 different years, have completed 111 treks for mountain gorillas in Rwanda, and have both named a baby gorilla in the Kawita Izina naming ceremony. Slackers, right? They have both won in the prestigious BBC Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition and were awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the North American Natural Photographers Association in 2021. Give it up for Joe and Mary Ann McDonald.
Well, I'll go first. Thank you very much. It's very, very nice to be here this evening. I'm sure as is up here, down there, it's pretty hot tonight and humid, but it's not going to last. But our spring was very quick and summer came very quickly. So, but it's very nice, like I said, to be there. By the way, I think we're now been doing this for 39 years because we'll have our 35th wedding anniversary this summer. So with that, we'll let Joe go ahead and take over.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, many years ago, I think when we were still all shooting film, we gave we were kind of like the featured weekend seminar, get to conference or whatever you want to call it down in your neck of the woods. And that was the best conference I've ever been to. It was the
CNPA.
Yeah, the media was incredible, and it was really a pleasure to be down there. I wish a lot of camera clubs now are just doing Zoom sessions, and I think you miss a little bit of the experience with that. So we have fond memories. So,
all right. So I'm going to, hopefully this will work. We checked it out. I'm going to start to share our screen so that we can start the presentation. So let's see if this works. And let me do this. And let me do this. And Keith, can you see our opening slide?
Not yet. You're in Pennsylvania, right, Mary Ann?
We're in Pennsylvania, and we're in the middle of the country. Half our neighbors are Amish. So, and right now our internet connection is going across the valley with a lot of trees in the way. So hopefully we'll stick to the 2-second delay that we had earlier.
Okay.
Can you now see our opening slide?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Okay, can we minimize that we want to see it?
No.
Yeah.
No, I can do that. There.
Okay, good.
Okay. All right. So
all right. So we're going to be talking about settings and techniques on wildlife photography. And with that being said,
oops, hang on a second here. See what's going on. This is what we were saying about. Hang on a second. All right. Oh my goodness. Hang on. Right here. This is what we're having issues with this. We were just telling Keith that we're hoping to be hooked up to Starlink soon. Oh, and we'll see if it works. Oh my gosh. Hang on a second, please.
No problem. No problem.
No, I can't. Hang on a second here. Gracious sakes. I'm going to. All right, let me try this again here. Hang on a second. Keith, talk a second here.
So, yeah,
Can I just ask you, when do you think that we'll have another board meeting like we had the other day?
I'll let you know.
Um,
Usually it's the first week of each month. Yeah, yeah. Has anybody been to Pennsylvania? I've actually been and seen the Amish in, what's the name of that place?
Lancaster County?
Lancaster, yes. We actually went there, I think, for our 10-year anniversary. My wife's not in here to confirm that. Pretty sure that's what it was. Yeah. Went to the Sight and Sound Theater up there. It was really cool.
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg? Yeah.
Oh, hang on a second here. Hang on a second. Okay, so we're going to, oh my goodness.
Why don't you just zoom in?
I don't think it can, you don't see any of do you see our first slide?
No, I don't see where you're sharing. We just see you.
All right, hang on a second. Oh. This is very embarrassing, but this is what happens sometimes when we're up here.
No problem. Yeah, we've had fun challenges like that on this end too, from time to time. So I can empathize with you. Anybody know any good jokes? What do you call a cow with no legs? Oh, yeah?
Oh, okay.
They just added another area to indoor area.
That was under construction when I was there.
$250 million. It's finished.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. Are you seeing a slide?
Here we go, Mr. Squirrel. Yes.
All right, good. All right, good. So don't just,
Okay, so what am I going to
you're
click?
going to click the right-hand side of and keep it on.
The right, okay,
Okay, hang on a second. Why don't I click when you tell me?
all right,
Oh my gosh. Okay.
okay. So obviously, this is photos by two bozos, Joe and Mary Ann McDonald.
Okay.
And this is just a selection of some of the books that are how-to books and Mary's Kids books and our natural history books. And back when we gave a program down at the Carolina conference, we were on film at that point, and you could actually make a living at that time selling photographs of, for freelance with magazines, etc. But as digital came about, our business kind of morphed to a more photo tours and photo workshops, which were a lot of fun and took us all different places in the world, as you can see here. And as you can see from this quick portfolio, we shoot a lot of different things, from macro and reptiles and amphibians to mammals, and do some landscape too, but that's not the point of this particular talk. The thing I really like to stress is mastering the craft. Back in film days, you really had to, because, we didn't have all of the bells and whistles we have now. But we just gave a conference just the other day, and a guy at the end of it said, I used to be really good at this, and then I got digital, and I forgot everything I know. What's wrong with me? And it's like, this happens to people. So hopefully we can address that to an extent tonight. When you're looking at for wildlife, one big parameter is, do you have time for the shot? Sometimes your subject's going to flee. And then what are you trying to convey, whether it's capturing action or landscape, and what settings do we need for that? A lot of folks, as you all know, use program mode, and it works 90% of the time very, very well. But in contrasty situations, like these macaws that were flying against a cliff face that was in the shadow, it's possible, I'm not saying it will definitely happen, but it's possible that your program mode will try to expose for the background and bias the exposure in that fashion and overexpose your subject. So mastering your craft and being able to do this without bracketing. And by the way, this was a shot that Mary did, which completely illustrates that point. She had a seconds, 4 or 5 seconds with this thing happening, which was like once in a lifetime type shot.
But what also happened with this is we were already shooting mirrorless. And with mirrorless cameras, what you see is what you get. So I knew right away, I'd already had an exposure for sun and this was in the shade, and I could quickly change it, seeing that I was underexposed at that point.
So remember chimping. And chimping, if you don't know what chimping is when you would take a picture, particularly, with the digital cameras, you couldn't do it with film, but with the digital cameras, then you'd hit play. And if the shot was really something you liked, you made noises like ooh, 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 which was how chimping came about. And mastering the craft, this is the best example I can ever think of. We had a very experienced photographers with us down in the Pantanal.
Of Brazil.
And they were shooting, the one guy was shooting on a program mode, and this Jaguar was about to come into this setting here with a black background and a bright beach. Well, he shot, and for whatever reason, whether it was bias for the sand or bias for the background, he didn't get the shot, and he chimped and then shot, chimped, and he never got the shot before the cat passed through that area. Had he had, and it would have been as simple as metering that sand and overexposing by a stop, and he would have had all his tonal values fall into place. So we shoot manual mode, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And although I really liked this shot, I didn't check my settings except for the exposure at that time, which ended up to have a sharp foreground, a Nile monitor, and the autofocus elephants in the background. I would have been curious to see how it would have looked if they were sharp. I think I would like this shot better, but it was kind of an accident.
Oh, look at that.
Now, we use manual mode, like I said, and if you do photograph wildlife, we would really recommend using aperture priority versus shutter priority. And the reason for that is usually for wildlife, you want the fastest shutter speed possible. So if you're shooting wide open for the whatever ISO you're using, you are absolutely guaranteed to have the fastest shutter speed for the lighting. If you're using shutter priority, in contrast, you would have to think, okay, I need such and such a shutter speed, and then maybe have to adjust with the ISO or whatever. It really simplifies things.
Custom modes.
And then custom modes, setting custom modes for frequently used settings, and we'll get on that in just a moment. But here's a good example. Here again, aperture priority. I think my lens was a 4.5 lens, and maybe I was using ISO 1600, and boom, I have the fastest shutter speed I can get with that. If you wonder about, well, I should be closing down for greater depth of field, these two Jaguar shots were taken within seconds of each other. I closed down the one to f11 and the other one I shot at the straight f5.6. I can't tell you which one is which. And this is only slightly cropped. So if I had shot at f11, I would be using 2 shutter speeds slower than what I would need for f5.6. Or if I was doing this by ISO, I would have had to quadruple the ISO. So instead of 400, it'd be 800, it'd be 1600. Now, because we shoot in manual mode, we often meter periodically for the lighting conditions that are there, just in case something happens and we're ready for it, that we can quickly pop up and fire and have a good chance that we have it where we need it to be. And in manual mode, particularly, you're setting your exposure for what you're trying to capture. Here with the peregrine falcons flying, I'm going to stop the action. But in other situations, I might use a slower shutter speed, imply motion, or animals in habitat, or whatever. And again, the beauty of manual mode is once you have the exposure set, if the subject itself doesn't go into different light, it doesn't matter what your background or subject size is. the exposure stays the same. Now, this grizzly bear was photographed at one of those captive animal shoots in Montana years ago. And the middle shot was the actual exposure or the actual composition. In Photoshop, I made a black background and a white background to illustrate that the bear is still correctly exposed, but that black background could have, I say could have, overexposed the bear because the metering could have biased in that fashion. And likewise for the bear on the right, it may have underexposed the bear as a program mode was biased towards the bright sky. As Mary mentioned before, if you don't shoot mirrorless, don't buy a camera in the future that is not mirrorless because it has all sorts of, and they're developing more stuff all the time with computational features. But just in traditional photography, what you see is what you get. And I used to be, and Mary as well, used to be like spot metering manual mode. I could care less what my metering mode is right now because I'm looking at the display, and when it looks the way I want it to look, I shoot. So it really doesn't matter where the meter is aimed because I'm still making the adjustments accordingly. Now, I'm sure many of you have read about pushing your histogram to the right to get as much data as you can. And that's fine. And it really will maximize the quality of the detail, if you will. But the problem with it is you have to, in software later on, readjust for the exposure. So what both Mary and I do is we take the shots basically as if it was film. What if it looks like it should be correct? That's our shot. And although the histogram isn't pushed as far to the right, I can tell you that professionally with BBC and everything else, it doesn't matter. You know, the only way you see that kind of noise would be if you'd go to like 400% or so, and that would be with a higher ISO. So my point on this is if you do push to the right, you're going to be using either a slower shutter speed or a higher ISO right off the get-go. And then in your program, Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever you happen to be using, you would have to then take the time to adjust to get the correct exposure. So we're recommending that you shoot as it looks and not pushing to the right. Shutter speed. Wildlife is usually or can move fast. And my friend was shooting at 2,000th of a second for this photo. And when he chimped, he's a notorious chimper, he thought the pictures were great. I was using the higher ISO and using 1/8,000th of a second. And the chipmunk was razor sharp. At 2,000, he was blurred because of the explosive action. Larger image sizes of action subjects like this bluebird taking off will require a fast shutter speed if you want to ensure that, in fact, you froze the action without any type of blur. If your subject's motionless, you can use a slower shutter speed, and you might even be able to handhold that. Believe me, I can't. But if you, with a tripod or a monopod, and if your IS is adequate, you can be using very, very slow shutter speeds, provided your subject is sharp. This is a Sri Lanka headless burfowl on the upper left, because at 1/15th of a second, it was pecking the ground. But you see on the upper right, it's now not moving. And there's the cropped image, and it is razor sharp at a 15th of a second. ISO 1600 off of a monopod. So if your camera has custom modes, and most of them do, I think at this point, I'd really recommend using them. For our camera, we're using the OM system, previously Olympus, and at least my setting, theirs might be a little different. C1 is for birds, and we have the basic exposure and ISO and focusing mode set for birds. C2 for mammals, C3 for pro capture, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Other cameras are developing that as well. And then C4 for single AF. And here's just, a couple examples. There's Mary's Jaguar again, and a Spider with a single AF point. Now, your wheel in the back and front that you may have or should have for controlling exposure, you have your choice of how you want to set that up. But personally, I think having the shutter in the back is better, because if I'm shooting wide open, my thumb can still be rolling that shutter to adjust for exposure, even while I'm firing. So that's my recommendation for that.
However, I'm the opposite. So just to know that when you have memory, memory with your fingers of what you do, it's whatever is best for you and you're used to.
Yeah, and Mary's smarter, and that's why she says she does that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we want to stop the action. Shutter or sharpness is the priority. If you have to raise your ISO in order to do that, fine. As I said, depth of field is usually not an issue, so you can be shooting wide open. And if your subject still requires a higher ISO, don't be afraid to use it. Here's ISO 3200. And with software, by the way, we're using a DxO Photolab 9 right now. This was 7. Look at the image on the bottom. That's the original shot. It's a little tropical ant pitta from Ecuador. The cropped image, as you see, the lower one looks great. When it's cropped and enlarged, it looked awful. But with Photolab, which does sharpening and denoise, I have a publishable picture there on the right. You'd never think it with that image that would be on the left. And then lens selection is so important as well. We used to have a lot of different lenses, and has been morphed down to a smaller bit in just a second, or I'll tell you why. Anyway, we want, as we're looking to buy a telephoto lens, how close can it focus? What's the work, if you're using macro, what's the working distance? How much magnification do you need? And the answer usually for that is as much as you can get. But then the big issue is, can you carry that lens? How much size or weight can you manage? And even with that, maybe it's where you intend to use the lens. Classic case on this, I was down in Maryland where there was a bald eagle congregation, and everybody's down there. And here comes this guy about my age walking up, and he has a 1-400 Canon. And we got talking, and he said, well, I have an 800 back in the car, but I'm not going to carry that thing all the way up here. Well, we're using that OM system, and what you see there right now is what both Mary and I, we both have this kit, can travel to India for 6 weeks with a backup lens, which is the bottom one, and those other 2 lenses, which the one goes up to 150 to 4. Well, we'll talk about it in just a second.
And just an aside, when we were Canon and I would have my 500 millimeter lens, my Mark IV, my tripod, my monopod, I was carrying between 30 and 40 pounds. I just had my 6th joint replaced 5 weeks ago. I have a reverse shoulder replacement on the left. I now have both knees, both hips, and both shoulders replaced thanks to this career.
Keep that there.
So you're bionic now.
I am totally bionic.
Yeah. So about 8 years ago now, we were approached by Olympus to just try the system out. And after using it for like 2 months, I said to Mary, we could either suffer and not have to spend a dime on gear because we had everything we needed, or we could bite the bullet. And honestly, I have never been more enthused about, I've shot Canon, I've shot Nikon, I've shot Canon again. I've never been so enthused about a system. That OM system is a micro four third. So that 150 to 400 is really a 300 to 800. And with a converter, which is built in, it's a 1,000 millimeter lens.
So I would also recommend, when we were in Sri Lanka, we had 2 guys with 600 millimeter Nikon lenses. They had a longer focal distance that they couldn't shoot, but we were closer. But also, they're so limited with just 600 millimeters. If you're going to go wildlife, think about doing the zoom lens because the compositional freedom is excellent.
Now, I can warn you that if you have a fragile ego, I know when I go to places like Waxahachie in Florida and I'm carrying my lens, which doesn't look nearly as impressive as a Canon 800 or monster round Sony, people dismiss me as just a hack. But I can walk back and forth as effortlessly. And often those guys, especially if they're older, they're stuck on one spot. For macro, working distance is so important because if you're using a short focal length macro lens, as you can see with this example here, you might be right on top of your subject, which means it's not going to stay around. So this is probably one of the most important points I would like to stress for you guys. And that is that as image size increases, your depth of field decreases. So as image size decreases, depth of field increases. When we're thinking particularly of macro, we want to be as tight and close as we can. But when we do that, we're actually shallowing our depth of field. And here's a little like 4-inch toy tiger. And the circles there are showing where the depth of, or the difference in discernible depth of field. The same f-stop, but one was at 60 inches, the other was at 22. So the 22-inch was a larger image size. And then I cropped the one on the right, so it's the same. And you can see that although the screen there isn't razor sharp, you can see how that depth of field certainly carried on. So for macro, by backing up and cropping, you can have the same image size, but you'll have greater depth of field. And that, again, is one of the beauties of that 4/3 system, because you're backed up almost twice the distance as you would with the full frame camera. And in doing so, you are increasing your depth of field. So mastering the potential of our gear. And one of the things that, if you're shopping for a camera in the future and it doesn't have it, get a camera that has a flip out and completely movable LCD monitor. Some of them, as you know, just pop out like right from the body of the camera, and they're not nearly as flexible. But with a flip out that you can be comfortably kneeling or squatting or sitting and looking straight down, you can be doing eye level shots. So what I want to show with this, with the round circle around my really dirty eyepiece, is if your eyepiece is dirty, the camera might think that you have your eye to the eyepiece and your monitor won't show up. And we've had that with people on trips and ourselves as well, that we thought our monitor had crapped out. And in fact, when we looked at the eyepiece or the eyepiece of whoever was with us and said, if you clean that, so if you're in dusty conditions or on a safari or something, it might get dirty and you may lose your monitor, but it's not broken. And because we're shooting pixels instead of film, pixels are cheap. So shooting on a motor drive burst certainly gives you a greater chance of capturing the action. And then depending on what type of camera you have, you might have a choice of how much frame rate you have to offer. For example, in this mode here, I have up to 120 frames per second or as low as 50. And again, depending on what type of camera you have, I'm showing my OM system one for this, but in various shooting or sequential shooting settings, you can change that as you wish. So for example, if you don't want to wade through 120 frames per second and end up maybe with 240 pictures in a burst, you can always take that down to a lower frame rate. And as I said, if you're shooting at one with the motor drive, 2 at a fast shutter speed, you don't have to worry about depth of field. It's either going to be sharp or it's not. And these ring kingfishers down in the Pantanal were shot at basically around 8,000th of a second. And provided we got them sharp or in focus, they were sharp. Your cameras probably have more than one focusing toggle. And I would really recommend that you get comfortable using both just to acquire the muscle memory so that like if you're wearing gloves or for whatever reason, you can switch to maybe the bigger rocker switch rather than the tiny one that I have above. And then your focus points. Most cameras have a variety of focus points, and you, at least with our system, we can cancel out some of the choices. So generally speaking, we have all, a single point, either a cross or a small square. And then our system, and I think others have this now too, is you can customize an autofocus point. The entire focus array is very, very good if you're trying to get birds in flight and or subjects that are against a background that's not going to be competing. Whether it's quite true today or not, the center single AF point used to be thought as the fastest one to acquire focus. I don't know if that's quite true today, and it's so hard to really discern or make a judgment on that. Your cameras may also have subject detection. And as I mentioned earlier, C1 for me is birds and C2 is mammals. And for most of the cameras that have that, it's magic. It knows that it's a mammal or it knows that it's a bird. And generally speaking, it will go right to the AF point as well. As I said, your camera might have a focusing array that you can customize. And what I've done here is I have 1 pixel high and the entire array across, which once it's activated, I can roll it up and down. But this array as it is perfect for like ducks swimming on a pond or here giant otters in the Pantanal, because I'm not worried about lower or higher. I want that sensor to be on those otters or ducks as they're swimming by. You may also have an opportunity to have not only autofocus and like focus tracking, but also tweaking a focus if you need to by means of the setting, which would be CAF tracking manual focus. And again, it depends on your camera. You also have, and this is again personal preferences, a choice in most cameras of having front or back button focus. And the beauty of back button focus is when you acquire focus by pressing the back button, if you take your thumb off the back button and recompose, the focus remains, it doesn't move. If you were using front button focus, then as you recompose, it's possible that the if your sensor's not on the subject, that it might miss the subject. However, with subject detection and the sophistication of the cameras now, and the fact that, again, Mary uses back button and is smarter than me, when I press the shutter button down, I'm guaranteed that my focus will be there rather than trying to remember to press my thumb in. And again, it's muscle memory, but there's a couple times that I've worried about that. Again, with our system here, we have bird, we have mammal, and you have your choices. So for a flying bald eagle coming in towards the camera, I'm on full focus array. And if you can see carefully, there's a little square around the eye where the autofocus locked in on that and followed the subject in. I think almost every camera now has either like a My menu or favorites or a star menu, depending on the system. Depending upon which camera system you have, if you wade through the entire menu, there might be more than 70 options that you can have. And if you have them on your My menu for the ones that you use, you won't waste time. And what we have here are the ones that we generally use. And if we have someone come to the house and they want us to set up their menu, I feel like an idiot because once you have this set, you never go back. So telling someone like, well, LiveND is here, I have to find it. But on my menu, it's already there for me. One of the neat ones that I think many of your cameras probably have is a manual focus assist. And although there's a magnify, which can be very problematic, another one is peaking. And how that works is if you use the manual focus to either correct the focus or for something like that, we're using manual focus, those red lines indicate that I'm in focus on both of them. And since the squirrel is going to be jumping from one branch to another, I'm pretty much guaranteed it's going to be sharp and in focus. Now, our system uses a feature called Pro Capture. I think Nikon now has
Is pre-shutter.
Pre-shutter. Unfortunately, only JPEG at this point, but I'm sure that's going to change if it hasn't already. Canon has it too with a feature, and probably Sony as well. It is an absolute game changer. And to illustrate, there was a monster dragonfly going across a pond down in South Texas for the birds. And I put it on Pro Capture because I knew that when I'd fire in it, and I'd fire when it would be in focus, by the time my finger pressed down on the shutter button or the camera actually activated, that dragonfly would be out of focus. But with Pro Capture, where it steps back on the frames, I got it. The same thing here. This Gabar goshawk was dive bombing these African hawks, and at the time, this was the very first trip that I used the OM system on a trip 8 years ago, and another guy was using a different system, and his wife would say, "Shoot!" Every shot he had, he missed the bird because it happened so quick. As was the shot I captured, but because it steps back in time up to 35 frames, I caught a variety of different poses. If you've ever frustrated yourself with trying to get a bird just as it launches from a perch and its tail is the only thing in the frame, this is where that computational feature we're talking about, that Pro Capture or pre-shutter or whatever, really shines. And here's an example of that. This is that same thing I did like with the squirrel, and here's how it was set up. I had a log that went up to a post, so he had to climb up the log, and then I had another log on a feeding post that the only easy way this chipmunk could go is go up and leap over. On manual focus, I had Mary put her hand up where that red line is. I focused on the hand, and then when the chipmunk jumped, it broke it broke the plane of focus. And although the shot I took was only like airspace because the chipmunk had already passed, going back in time, I had a razor sharp picture. Mirrorless cameras generally have a silent shutter. Back in film days and maybe some of the digitals, I know my Canon, it was just a clunk. It wasn't silent at all. The mirrorless cameras are silent, and it allows you to be close to a subject if you're in a blind or whatever that would otherwise flee if it heard a click, but it doesn't with that silent shutter. And then going on to just the compositional aspect of things, angles, how you position yourself if you can, or with your background of what we've done here is got very low and shot over a snowbank, as I did here too for this Falkland Island thrush. And here's how this works. If your vegetation or the framing device you have is close to your subject, chances are it's not going to be sharp, but it will be discernible and distracting. If there's a separation, meaning that your foreground is closer to the camera than your subject is, and there's a gap between, you'll get that soft, blurry look. And
Look
it's
at your aperture.
wide open. Thank you, Marianne. And there you go. Here's the example of that. And then incorporating habitat. I bet if you would go down to Brazil and photograph jaguars for the first time, you'd be thinking about get that frame filling shot because it's a trophy. But if you zoom back and get animal and habitat, you're often telling a better story. And certainly it doesn't look like you photograph a gorilla or a tiger in a zoo. You have it in the wild there. And I've done the same thing with macro or with a 14 millimeter wide angle lens where that wood turtle really shows its habitat, which wouldn't be the case if I had been using a longer lens and just on the critter. And anticipation, the more you know about your subject, or from experience or from reading, as an example, this tiger, when it put its nose down and was sniffing, we knew that it was going to come up and do this behavior called flamin'. It looks like it's a nasty snarl, but what he's actually doing is drawing in scent to get a really tasty detection of the smell. So anticipating action, be proactive, not reactive. A lot of times on safaris, we'll have people that like, stop. And it's like, if we drive ahead of it, it will come into us and we'll have whatever. Again, with the bears, knowing when they came out of the water, they're going to shake. And something like these, we waited, 4 hours?
About.
And because the mother leopard was known to come out onto this rock, and we were hoping she would, and the cubs would come too. And it was well worth that wait. And here, this was a first place for me in the BBC a couple years ago. And we waited probably 3 or 4 hours before the jaguars came out, took a drink, and then got into a little love spat before they disappeared. Now, today, I spent a couple of hours unpacking 30,000 live mealworms that we then put out for our birds to feed upon. And I do an enormous amount of shooting right around my house. For an example, for woodpeckers, if you drill holes into some logs and set them up near the feeder or whatever, the woodpeckers will come in.
If you have the holes.
If you have the holes.
Filled with suet.
And you can control it for your backgrounds or whatever. We were shooting, I often shot right from the porch before the birds would get acclimated to me. And a chair blind is really, really handy because it's a blind built into the chair. When you sit down, you pull that thing over your head, stick your lens through. It's a little bit of a tight fit. And you might droop that some people might need to use a pillow to raise themselves that they feel comfortable, but it's a great one. Now, this is my setup from a couple years ago. And when I would actually be going to shoot, I would take away a lot of those props so that my subject comes into a particular area. But otherwise, I have the bird's conditioned to come into any number of different locations, and then I can change from there. A real handy accessory for setting up your props is a Manfrotto articulating arm. And I'll caution you, when you buy one of those things, it may not come with that circled bottom piece there, which is the super clamp. It may just come with the arms themselves. But I can then articulate and move that articulating arm into whatever position I want and frame and get the shots. Unmanned shooting. Again, if you want to be a couch potato and maybe sit inside in winter and just let the camera do its job, you can do that by being there with a wireless remote that you would actually have to see and press in. And that's what I'm doing here for like a wide angle view of the downy woodpecker. Or you can use sensors, and Cognisys makes wonderful sensors. One is about $300, the other one is about $500. I won't go into the difference between the two, but the one on the left, the $300 one, would do virtually everything most people would need to do. And then another thing this time of year that is very exciting to shoot are hummingbirds. And if you're using ambient light, you could go up to like 8,000th of a second and probably like 4,000 onward. You'll freeze the wings like you would with a flash. However, you won't have depth of field unless you raise your ISO very high as well. Here, using flash
On the right.
I'm at 1/200th of a second with incredible depth of field. So here's a typical setup I have for that. I have two flashes in the front, another one that's like kind of top lit, and another one, a top lit, and then another aimed at the background itself. And there's the overhead view that shows how that would be positioned. And if you're interested in something like that, I have an ebook that goes into soup to nuts on how to photograph hummingbirds. Now, when you're shooting macro, if you can't close down, or even if you can and the depth of field is still very shallow, what do? Well, one thing you can do is shoot a series of shots where you change the focus slightly and then put that final composition together with Photoshop or Lightroom or Zareen, Stacker, or Helicone focus. And that works well. But I'm guessing that other cameras besides our OM system will be incorporating, if they haven't already, focus stacking. In our situation here, it will take up to 15 frames and then composite them into a large file JPEG. This was shot with the equivalent of a 600 millimeter at about 4 feet. And if I had tried to do that with a macro lens, there is no way, because I would have had to get much closer and the robber fly would have flown off. And also, if I tried to close down, I would have not the bokeh background, but a kind of a busy background, which I'm illustrating here. If I'm shooting wide open with the pink lady slipper, I get one sharp and a soft background. If I close down to get both of them sharp, even though the depth of field doesn't extend to the background, it tightens it enough that you have a discernible, and I'll argue, a potentially distracting background. So by shooting wide open and then using focus stacking, which I did in camera, my focus rolled through those two pink lady slippers at 2.8 or 4, whatever it happened to be, and that background is still a nice bokeh background. Same thing with this praying mantis egg case here. On the left, you could say, hey, that's a nice shot because it shows the mantid egg case kind of in habitat, which being a meadow. But if I was just going to draw your attention to the mantid, I can still have great depth of field, focus stacking, and a soft background. So I have a discount for 25%, 2 or more ebooks, and the discount code will be Carolina 2026, but don't do it tonight. I will put that on tomorrow, and it will be good for the month of June. So if anybody's interested. And then again, here's our various ways to get in contact with us. And
if you actually want an immediate answer, instead of the email with info@hoothollow.com, put my name, Mary Ann, at Mary Ann at hoothollow.com, because I'm always on my computer checking the email.
Notice you didn't say Joe at Hoot Hollow.
Joe doesn't check his email. You need to do mine.
So thank you, everybody. Anybody have questions?
So I'm going to stop sharing. So thank you.
Okay, very good.